Make it so the world never forgets me. She beamed back at me, eyes ablaze with excitement. That's what I want. What? How would I even? I stammered. This was the kind of statement you made drunk at 2 a.m., not to your best friend over lunch when discussing birthday wishes. She walked into my dorm and started pacing around my room. It's all part of my two-pronged attack. We make a great story of our experiences that nobody will ever forget, and you get all the fame and glory. She put her hands on her hips and laughed. You can thank me later for all those eyes on you. From anyone else, this would come off as arrogant and self-absorbed, but in the right hands, it was downright endearing. Olivia was that type of person. She oozed eccentricity, and I was always in her social shadow. She lit up a room every time she walked into it. The attention was always on her, and I was secondary. Not that I minded, of course. She was a blessing to my social anxiety and years of crippling PTSD. I was so lucky to have her choose me as her best friend. Or maybe we were just destined to be friends from day one. Who can say? All I know is that we bonded over a shared love of watching TV and morning runs. The rest was history. Dude, you know you have the power at your fingertips. She wiggled her hands and laughed. Literally. I was always confident around her and anyone in my close-knit friends. But this dumbfounded me. You want me to write about you too? I asked, picking at the skin on my fingers nervously, as the prospect of sharing my work with so many strangers terrified me. She looked at me and placed a hand on mine, her beautiful hazel eyes peering into my soul. I want you to want to do it. I'd support anything you did. You know that. She grinned. You are the best writer I know. Come to think of it, you're the only writer I know. I began writing at her behest. She would influence me to take on these long, fantastical tales of my past, intermixed with personal ones. You know, stories about hunting aliens with her lizard friend Donnie. Stories about when I laid in bed terrified at night as my mother's angry footsteps ascended the stairs and edged closer to my door. How I'd cry softly after and talk to Olivia about it for support. She cried a lot during those talks. For hours on end, she would sit on my bed and continue to share stories about our life that in 10 years of friendship, I'd remembered so little about. Adventures we'd been on that I was 99% certain she'd made up for brevity, but I didn't mind. Spending this time together was so valuable, and it passed almost in the blink of an eye. Before I knew it, the first entry was done, a history of the girl who survived it all, and I read it to her, nervous as hell as to how she'd interpret it. But she simply sat there in silence, her eyes darting from word to word, and I swear I could see the cogs wind in her mind, projecting the images in her head as her face was alight with joy, tears streaming as she leapt from her seat and jumped to hug me, saying thank you over and over again, my shoulder getting wet from tears. This is going to be amazing. We are going to be amazing. She beamed at me. Trust me, people will love this. Looking back, I wasn't sure why she wanted me to document her life anonymously when she was such a character already. It seemed odd to be her transcriber and not be able to tell the world that this amazing adventurer, this trendsetter steeped in light, this single note an octave above everyone else, ringing out loud and proud beyond the realms of what barriers sound can normally break, was the brightest light in my life, and could easily be yours or anyone else's, given 5 minutes and some good food. I remember the first lecture back in class after our winter break. I walked into a rapturous applause from my classmates and my professor. They quickly walked towards me, and I hesitantly looked back, assuming they were here for something Liv had done. But no. The professor took my hand in hers and smiled at me with such pure joy. Ricarda, I don't know what possessed you to document this, but, well, it's magical. To see you, the last person to ever stand up and share their work, craft something of this caliber. It makes me so happy. You have a real talent." The professor seemed so pleased with something I struggled to take as my own work. Were those tears in her eyes? Man, the emotional value was strong, but I wasn't expecting that. "Ree, this is superb. Are you doing a second entry anytime soon?" A friend in the back called out, to excited murmurs and agreements. "Of course she is. Why wouldn't she?" Liv bellowed behind me, having kicked the door open and put her hands on my shoulders with an exaggerated slap. I jumped and then nodded in agreement. The class cheered in response, and that entire lesson was spent engaging in conversations I'd have never thought possible for my awkward, anxious self before. The questions about my work filled me with a joy that only a creator can truly appreciate. That night I'd been walking home and thinking of what we could do to write Chapter 2, which we tentatively called A Present-Day Account of the Girl Who Made a Pact. I was so lost in my thoughts and in a situation without anyone to pull me out of it. I had walked headlong into traffic, narrowly avoiding an oncoming car. "Watch it, you stupid bitch!" the driver yelled before speeding off, obviously shaken up himself, but not nearly as much as I was at the prospect of having someone scream at me. It immediately took me back to that night just a couple years ago. The raised voices, the smashing of plates, the defiance once held in my voice as I clutched a university pamphlet and a suitcase, the ensuing whirlwind of fists, kicks, and smashes before silence fell upon the building I could never hope to call home, save for my whimpering and the rising sound of sirens in the distance. My knees buckled from under me, and I sat against the curb, trying desperately to put my breathing under control and remember what I had learned in therapy. Think of a feather and imagine it floating. Just focus on the feather, nothing matters but the feather. I focused on the lightness of the yellow, furry feather as it floated gently in the wind of my mind and began to count back. 10, 9, 8. I felt my muscles loosen just a little bit, a chill coming over me. 7, 6, 5. My breathing fell and I felt calmer, but I could hear footsteps rushing towards me. 4, 3, 2. I didn't open my eyes, but a snarling sound began to crawl up my shoulder and into my ear, the low doldrums of malice beginning to rumble through my skull. 1. One last chance to put things right, but you're going to fail on that front as well, aren't you? Just like you fail at being even half a decent daughter. I look up and see the towering, hulking mass of my mother staring back at me, her face a vile shade of yellow and her stress lines like a grill, letting evil intentions seep out of her brain and influence my thoughts. It had been a few months since I saw her, but she hadn't changed her nature one bit. She snapped her fingers, and I immediately got to my feet, dusting myself off. Look at you. Damn pathetic. You having a little dramatic moment, embarrassing yourself and me in front of people? You and your spineless generation know nothing of struggle. She spat, every word laced with barbs designed to throw me back to being a scared little girl again. She pulled a mock crying face and pretended to wail. Oh, it's all in my head. Wah, I'm sad. Watching a grown woman in her 50s behave like this, let alone it being my mother, was so utterly insulting and demeaning. But I fought back the tears and waited for her little performance to conclude, at which point, as if on cue, I'd say, "Sorry, Mom." But no apology was ever sufficient. She made me hang my head in shame as I walked with her back to my campus, signed in at the lobby in absolute silence, and ignored everyone asking me about my writing, if I was okay, or if I wanted to grab something to eat. One guy I liked seemed especially concerned, but stopped short of standing in front of me when I simply walked on in a trance-like state, not daring to rise my mother's ire and embarrass myself further in front of the people I'd felt I truly became myself around. I went back to my room, and the moment I shut my bedroom door, I felt the entire room begin to sink. It's hard to explain, but it felt like the lights were dimmer, the air was stale, and every footstep made me feel weaker. I sat at the edge of my bed as my mom stormed over to my desk and began rummaging incessantly for any evidence she could use to punish me, something she'd done since I was a child. "I know you have some heinous and sinful garbage here, Ricarda," she hissed, her hands like wrecking balls smashing at the foundations of confidence I'd built in her absence. She put her hands on the drafts I'd written with Olivia, and I felt the atmosphere change. Not even the moonlight that was once peering through the curtains wanted to bear witness to her rage, as she looked at the title and voraciously scanned each page, scrutinizing it for any mentions of her. You damn!" She was so angry that her eyes were bulging, her face now an ugly puce as veins popped on her temples and her liver spot-ridden neck. "You dared to document what happened in that home? That sacred house that you brought shame into? Who the hell do you think you are, young lady? I gave you life. I own you." I felt her begin to rise above me, the room blackening, and the only light seeming to come from her eyes as I sank into a curled up ball, hands pulling at my hair as I silently sobbed. "I will never forgive you for what you did in that home. The shame you brought upon me and your father when you left. You will regret this for the rest of your life. Do you understand me? I will make you bear the scars of your shame. I am never leaving your side." She bore down on me, teeth gritted and spit flying from her face as hands stretched out a pair of scissors on my cheek, dark intentions in mind. "Well, you know something? I'm never leaving her side either." Olivia stood there, out of breath and crouched low, a scowl on her otherwise exuberant face that painted a very different image of rage to that of my mother's. Where in my mother I saw contempt, in Olivia I saw one thing, and one thing only: love. Olivia leapt forward and in one motion bit down hard on my mother's neck. She howled and screamed until Olivia pulled away and landed in front of me, shielding me from any further harm as my mother writhed on the ground and screeched like a banshee, her limbs twisting as her voice became more contorted. I will never leave," she gurgled, the dissonance in her voice growing more apparent as her body began to fade. I stood up, tears in my eyes and fists clenched so tight I could feel blood dripping from my palms where the nails had dug in. "No, but you will be controlled. I will learn how," I shouted, staring straight at her as I saw fear in her eyes. "I will live my life with joy and love. That is the greatest victory I will ever score over you." I felt fresh tears in my eyes as the rage rose from my stomach and exploded out of my throat, a fire of words that had long been boiling over and waiting to be uttered as I screamed at the top of my lungs. "Now screw off, you dick!" Her form faded, and I felt the room return to normal as I sat back on the bed, breathing heavily and my face awash with tears, snot, and spit. I was an absolute mess. Olivia came up to me and gave me a hug, wiping away the tears and smiling. "You did it. I'm so proud of you, Ricarda." I smiled and held her close to me, the smell of her hair bringing me safety and joy that I couldn't experience anywhere else in the world, as I rubbed her head and said, "You're a good girl, Olivia. My best friend. That'll never change." It was summer 2017. I had gotten accepted to a university on the West Coast, and unbeknownst to my family, it was time to leave. It was a scholarship program I'd applied 2 months earlier, partly in the hopes of getting a step closer to my dream job, but mostly because I was determined to escape my parents' home. I stood there, a travel case packed, Olivia with me and a friend on their way to pick me up. Much to their delight, I imagine. What went on here wasn't exactly a secret in my town. I don't think I need to go into detail of the things that happened under that house prior to this night. We can safely assume it was every bit of unpleasant as you surmise, and worse. Mom was a vindictive, pious woman who hated everything she couldn't control. And Dad, well, Dad liked to drink. I didn't like him when he was sober, but I was terrified of him when he was drunk. I remember when I told them I had gotten in, pamphlet in hand and Olivia by my side for emotional support. Dad just laughed and took a deep swig from his bottle, saying, "Screw it, let the stupid bitch go and fail. She'll get herself pregnant right quick and flunk anyway. Damn whore. But know that when you step out of that door, you ain't coming back. You hear me? This family don't accept traitors." I stared at him, not saying a word. My mom breathing heavily and refusing to take her eyes off the pamphlet, hands shaking. A loud crash rang out. Dad threw a bottle at the wall and leapt across the room, standing nose to nose with me, the smell of alcohol on his breath, enough to put a brewery up for inspection. He took one of his huge hands and gently brushed my hair away from my face. "Do you hear me, girl? When you go out of that door, well, you're dead to me, to all of us. A shame, too." He gave a smug grin before shoving my head away and storming to the kitchen for another drink. "You can't go, Ricarda." Mom's voice was low. Every syllable was said with intent. "I will not allow it." I could sense Olivia getting mad, her hesitation the only thing precluding her from speaking out. But I held a hand out and tried to stand my ground, desperate to avoid picking my own skin or showing any signs of weakness. If I could hold it together for just a few minutes, I was sure I could make it. "I'm 20 years old. This is my decision, and you cannot stop me." I stared her down, but she began to mock me while making slow and deliberate steps towards me. And? You think I care what you want?" She screamed, punching me hard across the face and sending me to the ground, my back hitting the coffee table and shattering glass across the floor. "Now look what you made me do!" she bellowed, grabbing the bridge of her nose as her daughter cried out in pain on the floor, like it was a mess she had to clean up. Olivia ran over to me immediately, defiant and unafraid in the face of this monster. But my mom was undeterred. She picked Olivia off her feet by her throat, slamming her to the ground with ease, before kicking her hard in the stomach and sending her flying across the room. "Stupid bitch. Don't know that loyalty has its limits." She spat on her before looking to me and kneeling down, eyes meeting in a tenuous moment as the creature that birthed me began to smile. "Well, Ricarda, since you're all grown up now, I guess I need to give you a coming-of-age gift. It'll be ready in a little bit for you, so take a nap." A boot to my skull later, I was out cold. It was some time later that I found out the night I left and went to the hospital. Charges were pressed against my mom and dad for what they'd done, but I was too traumatized to give evidence, and my therapist told the court as much. They still went to prison, and I don't think they'll be out for a long time, not after the tapes they kept of their punishment sessions over the years. Olivia sat next to me as I held the second copy of our story in my hands, the ending showing a happy young woman who had beaten her PTSD into submission with the help of her best friend, a loving companion in the form of a golden retriever that was the brightest light in any room. Made friends with everyone she met and was the most genuine creature Ricarda had ever encountered. The sun began to shine through my tattered room as I made a phone call to my therapist and told him I'd had another incident. He was the first adult I trusted after getting away from that home and was utterly vital to my recovery. "Well, I'm glad you're okay now at least. Did you do the technique we talked about last time?" he asked, his voice soft and understanding, a father figure I never had. I stared at Olivia, who was resting her head on mine. The pages of our imagined dialogue spilled across the pages in front of us. "Yeah, I did," I said, sniffing and trying to hold back tears. Good. As long as you imagine Olivia is there, you can do anything. I can't wait to see your next story entry, by the way. Please keep bringing them to our sessions, and don't hesitate to call if you need anything. The call ended. I sit there for a few more minutes before Olivia breaks the silence, looking up at me with those big eyes that had always brought me so much comfort. "You're gonna be fine, Ricarda. You know that, right?" she asked. "I know. I can't exactly rely on this forever, can I?" I replied, knowing full well what I was doing. "I mean, these chats aren't even real. I won't get better if I take it this far. I'm still so weak." I felt the tears run down my face as she put a paw on my arm. "They were real to me. They always will be. Because they mattered to you. Love kept me alive, and you'll find that love again. We're kinda special like that." She licked my face, but the tears kept coming as I wrapped my arms around her. I'm gonna miss you, Liv. So much." I nestled my face in her fur and desperately tried to remember that smell one last time before this faded from me. "I will make sure nobody ever forgets you. I'll write every day. I'll tell everyone your stories, and I will never forget what you did for me." "I'll miss you too. After all," my arms passed through her frame as she bore a big smile on her face. "You're all I have." I've been a wedding photographer for nearly 10 years, and I thought I'd seen it all. Trashy, beautiful, tragic, hilarious, or just bizarre. I have stories. I have the typical groom getting caught, getting it on with the maid of honor, family getting into brawls, brides ODing in the bathroom, gay couples having no one attend their wedding, or worse, the one uninvited homophobic relative crashing just to be a dick. Stories. But we aren't here for the typical stories. If we were, we'd be here all day. We're here for the wedding from last October. Fall weddings are probably my favorite. If I ever get married, I'll probably get hitched in the fall. It was the parents of the bride who came to me, asking for my services for a wedding in 2 weeks. Their original photographer apparently up and quit on them, and they were desperate to have their darling daughter's wedding immortalized in picture format. Luckily for them, I had a clear schedule. I did charge them quite a bit extra for the suddenness of it all, but judging by the father's Rolex, it wasn't that big a deal. One thing I'm good at guessing is a family's wealth status, and once again, I was on point. The Seawrights were rolling in dough. Not that I really like them, though. I'm not required to like all my clients, although it does make things a bit more relaxing. Harold Seawright absolutely leered at my chest whenever he thought I wasn't looking, and Carol was clearly the trophy wife that was over the hill. I've never seen a human being that genuinely looked more like plastic than her. Nothing wrong with plastic surgery or Botox, but there's gotta be a cutoff at some point. I think I should have been more off-put by the parents coming to me rather than the bride, but I just figured said bride was busy with other wedding planning crap and didn't think too hard on it. Day came and, oh boy, I realized I was getting into something I didn't want to be a part of right away. First time I saw the bride, Tanya, I had a brief moment of I don't know how old this girl is. She could have been 16, she could have been just 18. Definitely not over 20 though. I've seen young marriages when it's a shotgun affair, but then I met the groom, Marcel Wingate, who was definitely no younger than 30, and Marcel was just... something felt off. The man was a giant for one. He towered over me, let alone Tanya. With his long, pale face and sunken eyes, he could have been Lurch from the Addams Family. When he shook my hand and introduced himself, I barely repressed a shiver. but years of practice helped me to smile and act like there wasn't something slimy about all of this. Tanya never said a word when she was made over for her big day. Only Carol did, chirping and twittering about. How about you make her hair a little bigger? Or make her eyes pop. She has such pretty eyelashes. Luckily, Carol had to go and have a smoke every 15 minutes, so the makeup and hair people could have a moment to actually work. By the time it was all over, Tanya looked perfect. Her dress was basically a white ball gown. A tiara was placed in her strawberry blonde hair, cheeks blushing a perfect pink. But unlike most brides, she still hadn't said a word, and those weren't sure as hell tears of joy she was holding back. I'm sure you've heard about the first look photo fad. I find it great to get that perfect expression a groom makes when he sees the bride in her dress for the first time. It's usually quite cute. This was the first time I've shot a first look photo where I truly believe it was the first time the bride and groom have actually looked at each other. Marcel did seem to have his breath taken away by his lovely bride, but her expression was less than thrilled as he took her hand and gave it a tight squeeze. My stomach turned when he leaned in for a kiss on the cheek, and she quite obviously flinched. It's time I put a pin on the myth that arranged marriages only happen in foreign countries, and only people from certain cultures take part in it. They happen all the time in the US, and more often than not, it's an old man who wants a virgin bride, and by virgin, I mean still in high school. This wouldn't even be the first one I was hired to photograph. I managed to catch Tanya alone in the room she got ready in, sitting next to the open window and twirling an unlit cigarette between her fingers. Need a light? I offered as I came in. No thanks, I don't smoke, but they say it makes you feel better, right? She said, looking up at me with those doll-like blue eyes. It also gives you lung and throat cancer. I took the cigarette from her and lit it up for myself. But I'm a bad example, so do as I say, not as I do. Now that got a smile out of her, even if it only lasted a second. How often do you smoke? She asked. Depends on the day. Usually I have 2 or 3. Bad day I can have a few more. I lowered the cigarette and looked down at her. How old are you, Tanya? 19, 20 in a few weeks. I have a bit of a baby face. She poked one of her cheeks. Why do you care? I glanced at the door to make sure Carol wasn't going to barge in. Tanya, are you not okay with this? The wedding? I asked quietly. Tanya's eyes widened. Damn, you're good. She also glanced at the door. Harold, my stepdad, arranged all of this. If he had it his way, it would have happened when I was 15, but Marcel kept delaying. Business, apparently. He tried to delay another year, but my dad implied he had other offers. She shivered and wrapped her arms around herself. If I said no, Harold would kick me out and cut me off, frozen my bank account. I'd have nothing and no one, and I don't know what I'd do if that happened. I reached into my purse and pulled out one of my business cards. Flip the card over. It has a number for a woman's shelter. They specialize in helping women escape from dangerous home situations. Hides them, helps them get started in a new city if need be. Below that is my personal home number, if you just need to talk, okay? Tanya took the card and clung onto it tightly before tucking it into her bra. You might be the nicest person I've ever met, she murmured. I gave her shoulder a squeeze. I try, I said before extinguishing the cigarette on the windowsill. If you need to escape anytime tonight, just ask me to help you go to the bathroom. We can pull a whole runaway bride, I joked. That got another laugh out of her, just in time for her mom to pop into the room. Well, what's taking so long? Hurry up, the wedding's going to be starting in 15 minutes, and I don't want you to cry and make your face all blotchy and ugly, she whined. Tanya's brief joy faded and she gave me one more sad look before following her mother out. The ceremony would have been so much more beautiful if I didn't know the dirty little secret behind it all. Tanya didn't smile once. I don't think even one of those bridesmaids was an actual friend of hers, or at least not a sincere one. When the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," Tanya let one tear slip down her cheek when Marcel leaned down to kiss her. I was seriously considering calling the cops, but what could they do? Tanya would likely cave and say nothing was wrong, and since she wasn't a minor, they couldn't label Marcel a pedo and her stepfather a child seller. It still didn't make the situation any less crappy. All I could do was snap pictures of the worst day of Tanya's life. At the reception, I was constantly being nagged by Carol about what pictures to take, to the point where I wanted to rip her hair out. But I did notice something different about the first dance between the couple. Tanya at first was stiff as a board, reluctant to even touch Marcel, but he leaned down and whispered something in her ear. Her entire demeanor changed in a blink of an eye to one of surprise, and I managed to read her lips. "Really?" Marcel nodded, and I managed to catch a picture of the first smile Tanya had since she said "I do." By the end of the dance, she was actually starting to get into it, resting her head on his chest as they swayed to "1,000 Years." It was a complete 180-degree change. Tanya was now one of the happiest, and dare I say it, flirtiest brides I've ever seen. She even leaned up to kiss him on the cheek as they sat down, something that took even Marcel by surprise, judging by how he blushed. I genuinely started to wonder if Marcel slipped something in her drink to get her acting so happy, when Carol started to nag me again about where her husband was. She was the kind of mother who forgot this was her child's wedding instead of her own, and she wanted pictures of her and Harold. In order to get the hell away from her, I told her I'd go find him. He'd been hitting the open bar a little hard that night. I assumed he was in the bathroom, either throwing up or cheating on his wife. It could have gone either way at that point. When I approached the men's room, I heard something that sounded like gargling or swallowing. Ew, I know, but I kinda hoped to ruin this nasty bitch's day if her husband really was cheating, so I opened the door with my camera at the ready. I made eye contact with Harold. Or rather, I made eye contact with Harold's head. It was sitting in the sink, expression twisted in abject horror. The room was soaked in blood, body parts strewn about the floor. Meanwhile, Marcel had stripped out of his tuxedo and was currently swallowing Harold's arm, whole. Now, I was wondering if I had something slipped into my champagne. Humans can't just unhinge their jaw like that, each gulp taking Marcel's arm deeper down his throat. I saw the tips of Harold's fingers disappear with a small wave of goodbye, and then I dropped my camera. Yes, I heard something break. No, I didn't care. I just saw the groom eat the father of the bride. Marcel's head shot up and his eyes, before now they were a dull, watery gray, but now they were mottled brown and red with slitted pupils. I felt frozen when those eyes looked at me. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry. One moment." Marcel turned to the sink that was free of a man's head and vomited. I heard several things clatter on the porcelain before he fetched them out and washed them off. With an embarrassed clearing of his throat, he walked up to me and pulled me into the bathroom. I thought I was dead, but instead, Marcel placed several diamonds in my palm. "For the camera, I didn't mean to startle you," he said. I managed to get out as I stared at the literal handful of diamonds. This would pay for more than the camera. "Why did you devour Harold?" "Oh, I've wanted to do that for years." Marcel chuckled as he grabbed some paper towels to wipe off his chin, like that would take away from the fact he was still naked and bloody in front of me. "A terrible person actually tastes quite divine. You would taste absolutely terrible. It'd be like swallowing nails. Meanwhile, a man who offers his own daughter as a sacrificial lamb to something he knows eats humans, he tastes like the richest cut of steak. cooked medium rare and seasoned to perfection. This situation had taken on a whole new level of messed up. Wait, seriously? Oh, absolutely, Marcel snorted, and he'd do it again. All for what happens when my stomach processes human bone. I clutched the diamonds. You're not going to hurt Tanya? I asked. Marcel shook his head vigorously. God, no. I kept delaying the wedding in hopes that she'd manage to find a way out, but I think Harold was getting bored with my cold feet. There would be plenty of other people willing to pay for her, even if my payment would be easily thrice what others would offer. God, I was starting to feel a little dizzy. Here I was, talking to a human-eating groom. I glanced out the door and a horrible idea entered my brain, one that would surely earn Marcel's good favor and help out Tanya. So if I told Carol she could find her husband in the men's room, I asked. Marcel seemed puzzled for a second but caught on quickly. With a nod, he picked up the head and tossed it into one of the stalls. I heard it splash in one of the toilets, and I almost started giggling. I was nearing hysteria. Go ahead. I'll be waiting, he said as he kicked more limbs out of sight. I almost left when I had to ask one more question. What the hell are you? Marcel cocked his head to the side before he changed, just for a second. One moment he was a blood-soaked man, absolutely horrifying, but normal. The next he was a snake, sort of. His body was gone, replaced by the body of an anaconda, but his head was still the same, minus the flick of a slime, forked tongue from his mouth. Then he was back to normal. He responded with a shrug. Funnily enough, I was hoping you'd tell me. I don't have a clue. I left the bathroom and bumped into Carol almost immediately in the hallway. Well, where is he? She snapped. I just pointed a thumb towards the bathroom. Think he's not feeling so well, I said before I was nearly bowled over by the grumpy bitch. I watched long enough for her to open the door and for a scaled tail to shoot out, snag her around the arm and drag her into the bathroom before I headed back to the wedding. The problem seemed to solve itself that night. Marcel came back, the men's room locked after apparently someone got quite sick in there. Tanya no longer had to behave a certain way to please her mom, and I think she had a good night. I used my backup camera to make sure to get all the pictures of her smiling. Carol and Harold vanished into thin air, never to be seen or heard from again. And those diamonds paid for quite the nice new camera. Like I said, it's been a year. I sure as hell haven't forgotten that wedding. But what prompted me to share it was that I got a friend request from Tanya on Facebook. I normally don't accept friend requests from previous clients, but this one time I chose to make an exception. She does look so much better. She's going to college. She now sculpts and paints. She regularly volunteers at the women's shelter I directed her to when we first met. And every Friday night is a group date night at the local arcade with some of Marcel's friends that now appear to be her friends as well. Apparently Marcel is quite the Dance Dance Revolution master, but is terrible at shooting games. Her most recent picture was her and Marcel smiling, and she was holding up an ultrasound picture. Thank you for making it this far. I'd like to encourage you to subscribe if you like my content. If you'd like to follow me and want to be involved in what I'm doing / talk to me, follow me on Twitter or Instagram. If you'd like an offline experience, check out the podcast, The Midnight Podcast. And if you're at all inclined, I've got some merch out there to be purchased if you'd like to support the channel. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next video.